Told her about finding out she'd texted him from my phone, about fixing things with him, about being scared of how she'd react. But she talked over me before I could get 3 sentences out. You deliberately humiliated me. You snuck around behind my back and made me look stupid to everyone who knew the real story. Do you know how many people must have seen you there and then watched me talk about how Colin didn't want you? You're the one who texted him from my phone. My voice got louder. You sabotaged me first, because you stole my moment. She was yelling now. You knew how much that ball meant to me. You knew I'd been planning for it for 3 years. And you just took it. I didn't take anything. Colin chose me. That's not something you can steal. The argument went on for 20 minutes. She kept saying I'd been plotting against her since the beginning, that I must have contacted Colin beforehand to arrange the whole thing. She called me a snake and a fake friend. She said I'd been pretending to be supportive while stabbing her in the back. I tried to stay calm, but finally I lost it. You sabotaged me first, I said again. You texted Colin from my phone and told him I didn't want to go. You deleted the messages so I wouldn't know. And you've been undermining my confidence for 3 years by calling me the supportive friend type and acting like I should be grateful you even hang out with me. Alexis went completely silent. For about 10 seconds, she just stared at me. Then her expression changed into something cold. You're delusional if you think Colin actually likes you. He probably felt sorry for the sad girl in plain clothes. Or maybe it was a dare. Pick the ugliest girl you can find. That's probably what happened. Something inside me broke, but not the way it usually did when she said things like that. This time, instead of hurt, I felt clarity. I could see the pattern so clearly. Years of little comments designed to keep me small. Years of positioning herself as the pretty one, the chosen one, while I was supposed to accept being the backup friend. I'm done, I said. I'm done listening to you tear me down. I'm done pretending this is a normal friendship. You don't treat people you care about like this. She laughed. You'll come crawling back. You always do. Because without me, you're nobody. I walked to my room and closed the door. I could hear her moving around in the living room, slamming things. Then my phone started buzzing again. I looked at it and saw she was posting on social media. I opened Instagram and there it was. A long, detailed thread about how I'd betrayed her by secretly going to the ball after she'd been so gracious about Colin choosing me. She made it sound like she'd been totally supportive and I'd snuck around behind her back for no reason. She carefully edited out the part where she sabotaged me. Made herself look like the victim of my cruel deception. My phone exploded with messages. Mutual friends asking what happened. People taking sides. Some believed her version. Some asked for mine. I sat on my bed watching the notifications pile up and realized she was forcing my hand. I could either publicly defend myself or let everyone believe I was the villain in her carefully crafted story. I sat on my bed staring at my phone until 3 in the morning. The notifications kept coming in waves, and every time I thought they'd stopped, another round would start. I opened a blank post and started typing. My hands shook as I tried to find the right words to explain everything without sounding cruel or defensive. I deleted entire paragraphs and rewrote them. I wanted people to understand what really happened, but I didn't want to destroy Alexis publicly, even though she'd tried to destroy me. Around 4 a.m., I finally had something that felt honest. I explained how she'd texted Colin from my phone while I was in the shower and deleted the conversation. I attached screenshots showing the message she'd sent pretending to be me and the timestamp proving I was showering when it was sent. I wrote about how she'd spent 3 years telling me I was the supportive friend type and not the chosen type. I kept it factual and tried not to make it sound like I was attacking her. I read it 12 times before finally hitting post at 5 in the morning. Then I turned off my phone and tried to sleep, but my brain wouldn't shut down. When I woke up 3 hours later, my phone had exploded with responses. Some people were shocked about the text message sabotage and said they couldn't believe Alexis would do something like that. Others commented that I still shouldn't have lied about going to the ball, and that deceiving her made me just as bad. A few mutual friends said we were both being dramatic over a guy and needed to grow up. One girl I barely knew wrote a long comment about how this whole situation was toxic, and we both needed therapy. I felt sick reading through everything because no matter what I said, some people were going to think I was the villain. My phone rang around 2 that afternoon and Colin's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer because I was embarrassed about the whole mess being so public. He asked if I was okay, and his voice sounded angry but not at me. He said he'd seen everything on social media and couldn't believe Alexis had sabotaged me like that. He asked why I hadn't told him about all the other stuff she'd said over the years about me being the supportive friend type. I explained that I'd gotten so used to her comments that I didn't even recognize them as put-downs anymore. Colin got quiet for a moment and then told me about his former best friend from high school who constantly competed with him over everything. Grades, sports, girls, even stupid stuff like who could do more push-ups. He said it took him 2 years after graduating to realize that real friends don't make you feel like you're always losing some invisible competition. We talked for over an hour about toxic friendships and why people stay in them. He said something that stuck with me, that sometimes we accept treatment from friends that we'd never accept from a stranger, because we confuse history with loyalty. I felt less alone after that call because someone finally understood why this whole situation was so complicated. That evening, someone knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it expecting Alexis, but found Liliana Gonzalez standing there instead. She lived in the room next to mine, and we'd always been friendly, but never really close. She asked if she could come in, and I moved aside to let her. She sat on my desk chair and said she was glad I finally stood up to Alexis. I must have looked surprised because she laughed and said she'd been watching the dynamic between us for 3 years. She told me Alexis treated me badly, and she'd wanted to say something before, but didn't want to cause drama. She said she'd seen how Alexis always positioned herself as the pretty one and made subtle comments that kept my confidence low. She offered to be a witness if I needed to talk to housing about the hostel living situation. I thanked her and felt grateful because I usually kept to myself and didn't realize anyone had noticed what was happening. She hugged me before leaving and said real friends build you up instead of tearing you down. The next week was exhausting. Our mutual friend group basically split into factions. Some people sided completely with Alexis and stopped talking to me in the dining hall. Others thought her text message sabotage was worse than my deception and made a point to sit with me instead of her. Most people just seemed tired of the whole situation and avoided both of us. I lost a few friends I'd had since freshman year who believed Alexis's version that I'd been plotting against her from the beginning. But I also got closer to people like Liliana and Dominic who told me they'd always thought something was off about how Alexis treated me. Dominic pulled me aside one day and said he'd watched Alexis manipulate situations for years and was relieved I finally saw through it. The social fallout felt like middle school drama, but it was real, and it hurt losing people I'd considered friends. Living in the same apartment with Alexis became unbearable. We barely spoke except when absolutely necessary. She'd make pointed comments about fake friends whenever I walked through the living room. She'd turn up the TV volume when I was trying to study. She'd leave her dishes in the sink for days, knowing it bothered me. I started spending most of my time at the library or at Colin's place just to avoid being home. I went to the housing coordinator's office and explained the situation. The coordinator was sympathetic and said I could request a room change for spring semester, but nothing was available until then. She told me I was stuck in this hostile environment for another 6 weeks. I counted down the days on my calendar and tried to stay out of the apartment as much as possible. Colin invited me to a Marine Academy event 3 weeks after everything blew up. I was nervous about meeting more of his friends because I worried they'd heard about the drama. But when we arrived, everyone was welcoming and treated me like I belonged there. Colin introduced me to Declan Knight, one of his closest friends from the academy. Declan's date was friendly and mentioned that Colin had talked about me for weeks before the ball selection. She said he'd been planning how to ask me and was worried I might say no. I looked at Colin and he smiled and squeezed my hand. Being around people who didn't know about the Alexis situation and just saw me as Colin's girlfriend felt incredibly refreshing. No one was judging me or taking sides. They just accepted me as part of the group. Declan's date also said Colin had told everyone I volunteered at the Veterans Center, and that's what first caught his attention. Hearing that made Alexis's claims that he felt sorry for me seem even more ridiculous. I was making coffee in the apartment kitchen one morning when Alexis walked in. We'd been avoiding each other for 3 weeks, and the sudden proximity made me tense. She stood there for a moment and then said we needed to talk like adults. I cautiously agreed and turned to face her. She said she'd been thinking about everything, and she was sorry for texting Colin from my phone. My hope lifted for a second until she immediately added that I still shouldn't have lied about going to the ball. She said we both made mistakes, but mine was worse because I deliberately deceived her. I realized this was as close to an apology as she was capable of giving, one that still made everything partially my fault. She couldn't just apologize without adding conditions or spreading the blame around. I took a deep breath and told her I appreciated the partial apology, but I couldn't go back to a friendship where she needed me to be less confident, so she could feel better about herself. I said her years of subtle insults about me being the supportive friend type had really damaged me even if she didn't mean them that way. She looked genuinely surprised, like she had no idea what I was talking about. She said she was just being honest about our different social roles, and that some people are naturally more outgoing and attractive, while others are better in supporting roles. She said I was being oversensitive and reading too much into normal friend observations. That confirmed everything I needed to know. She fundamentally didn't understand how her words had affected me and probably never would. We reached an agreement to be civil roommates for the remaining weeks of the semester. No more pointed comments about fake friends. No more social media drama or public arguments. Just polite coexistence until housing changes happened in January. It wasn't friendship and it wasn't the closure some people expected, but it was livable. I felt relieved to have clear boundaries even if they weren't the reconciliation everyone thought we should have. Some mutual friends seemed disappointed that we didn't hug and make up. But I was done pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Finals week came and went. I got my approval for a room change to a single for spring semester. I packed up my stuff the day after my last exam and moved everything to my parents' house for winter break. My sister picked me up, and on the drive home she asked how I was doing. I told her everything that happened since the ball. She was quiet for a while and then said she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She said watching me accept Alexis's treatment for 3 years had been hard, but she knew I had to figure it out on my own. My parents were supportive when I got home, even though they'd always liked Alexis and seemed sad the friendship ended. My mom said sometimes friendships run their course and that's okay. My dad asked if I was sure I'd tried everything to fix it. I explained that you can't fix a friendship where one person needs the other to stay small. They both hugged me and said they understood. Having their support felt validating even though the situation was complicated and messy. Winter break arrived with the quiet relief of distance and space. Colin and I started doing video calls every few days, and those conversations felt different from any friendship I'd had before. He'd ask about my day and actually listen to my answers without redirecting the conversation back to himself. When I mentioned feeling nervous about a family dinner, he didn't tell me I was overreacting or that other people had it worse. He just said my feelings made sense and asked what would help me feel better. I noticed how different this was from years of Alexis dismissing my concerns or turning them into opportunities to talk about her own problems. One night we were on a call and I mentioned missing the campus veterans center where we'd first crossed paths, and Colin smiled and said he'd been hoping I'd bring that up. He told me he'd visited 3 times before the ball selection, always timing it so he could see me interact with the older vets, and he'd been working up the courage to introduce himself for weeks. Hearing that made something shift in my chest because Alexis had spent years convincing me that guys like Colin didn't notice girls like me unless they felt sorry for us. But Colin had noticed me specifically because of my character and kindness, not despite some imagined flaw. We made plans for spring semester, including study dates at the library and weekend trips to nearby hiking trails, and I realized I was building something real with someone who genuinely wanted me to succeed and feel confident. My sister came into my room one afternoon and caught me smiling at my phone during a text conversation with Colin, and she sat on my bed and said she was glad I'd finally found someone who treated me the way I deserved. That validation from her meant everything because she'd watched the Alexis friendship damage my self-worth for 3 years. Spring semester started with me moving into my single room in a different building, and the freedom of that space felt incredible. I could decorate however I wanted without worrying about Alexis's opinions. I could study without her pointed comments about how some people had to work harder than others. I could just exist without constantly monitoring whether I was being too confident or too successful or too anything. 3 weeks into the semester, I was grabbing lunch in the dining hall when I saw Alexis at a table across the room with some girls from her communications class. Our eyes met for a brief second, and we both nodded politely before looking away. No dramatic confrontation. No tears or apologies or attempts to rehash everything that happened. Just 2 people who used to share everything and now shared nothing. I sat with Liliana and Declan, who'd become real friends over the past few months, people who celebrated my successes instead of finding ways to diminish them. Colin joined us a few minutes later and kissed my cheek before sitting down, and I caught Alexis watching from across the room with an expression I couldn't quite read. I turned back to my friends and focused on the conversation happening at my table, instead of worrying about what she thought. Sometimes I felt sad about losing what I thought Alexis and I had, but mostly I felt relieved to be free of constantly feeling like I wasn't enough.